Okay, hi everyone. My name is Cicely Bell Blaine. I am an activist and consultant and anti racism educator, originally from the UK but based in Vancouver, BC, which is on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I'm really excited to be joined by some of the members of Heartland, and we're going to have a conversation today about Black Lives Matter, about anti-racism work, and about allyship in the fight against racial injustice. So I'm going to hand it over to Michelle to just provide a bit of overview because she's the one responsible for sort of bringing everyone together and bringing me into the conversation as well.
Thank you so much, Cicely. So this came about because I've always shared with my fans and my followers things that I'm passionate about, social justice, human rights issues. This is a critical time in history, and I was sharing a lot of this with my followers. And some of the feedback I was getting was quite surprising to me. I was getting feedback as if people felt angry or betrayed by some of the things I was posting. And speaking to Alicia, I noticed that she was getting some of that feedback as well. And so we started a conversation. We reached out to Katam and Dio and Madison, and they felt passionate about this issue as well. So we decided we wanted to host a conversation and just talk about this issue because we all feel passionate about it. And that way we could share our thoughts and feelings with our followers.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I think it's really wonderful that you've brought everyone together for this conversation, and I really hope that folks will learn something from it. So I thought it'd be great if everybody could introduce themselves and maybe just share with everyone, who you are, but also why you're here in this conversation today, why you're invested in the process, and what's important to you.
Hi, I'm Madison. I am on Heartland, so that's how I know everybody. And Michelle and Alicia both reached out to me and said that they wanted to talk about this issue, and I thought it was a really good idea. I think, especially given the show Heartland that we're on, I think it's a really interesting and kind of important thing to talk about because I do think that our show is very predominantly white, and I think it's really important to stand in solidarity with people who think this is an issue. And I think that it's an issue for me, it's an issue for everybody, and I'm interested to hear what everybody has to say as well.
My name is Dio Ade. I'm also one of the characters on Heartland. I actually play Katim's father. I don't know where he is in this but I see him right there. Actually, wait, right there. Yeah. So I'm one of the characters. I play the sheriff, and again, I play Katim's dad. With what's going on in the world right now, I am a Canadian who lives in America, and I am literally boots on the ground seeing all of the buffoonery that's going on. And this is a topic that definitely needs to be spoke more about in not just in America, but in Canada and globally. And I was very flattered when Michelle and Alicia reached out to me. I was like, hell yeah, I'm in. Just let me know when and where. And I'm happy to be here.
Hi, my name's Alicia Newton. I'm on Heartland as well, I guess. Michelle and I were talking about bringing everybody together to discuss this issue and stand in solidarity. I think it's really important that everybody speaks up during this time. Like Michelle said, after the murder of George Floyd, both of us started sharing a lot of resources and a lot of information on the Black Lives Matter movement on our social platforms, and both of us got a lot of backlash, but we also got a lot of positive feedback with people that were really thankful for us using our platform for good, and that's kind of how this idea came about, is us trying to use our platform to make a difference. And I think that silence is violence and silence is complacency. So this is just us doing our due diligence, and I'm really happy that everyone could come together today to do this.
My name's Katam O'Connor. I play Adam Parker on Heartland. Dio's my dad, and I think it was a bad idea to be outside for this. And I'm here. I'm here because after the George Floyd video got out, I just went down this spiral of like educating myself or And I was in film school at the time, so they gave us a project to do a documentary. So that was my excuse to start on a documentary. So I'm currently working on that. I went to my first Black Lives Matter protest, or just protests in general, and it was amazing. I felt the energy, and I carried that momentum throughout the days until Alicia actually reached out to me and said that she had this idea with Michelle to do this conversation, and I thought it was perfect. And so I also was one of those people that were like hesitant to like speak out because I was just like so closed in with emotions, trying to like figure out everything because everything's happening at the same time, and so it's kind of crazy. And then I saw this opportunity, and I thought, yeah, this is exactly what I'm passionate about. This is the energy I need. So yeah, that's what I mean.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I think today's conversation is going to be really really powerful and really inspiring for folks who have questions and, you know, are confused and want to be part of the movement. So I think, you know, as you mentioned, there is, you know, these conversations for some people are quite new. It seems like 2020, the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor was some of the first times, for some people, the first time that they really understood what Black Lives Matter was and really started to talk about racial injustice. But actually, Black Lives Matter as a movement dates back to 2013, and obviously Black activism dates back decades, centuries, right? So my first question for you is, you know, Black Lives Matter just started as a hashtag, started as a way to draw attention to police brutality, and then it sparked a revolution, and that has been going on, you know, for about 7 or 8 years now. And within that, obviously, when a revolution begins, there's people on either side, and it has sparked some backlash. But I'm curious to know, when you hear the statement Black Lives Matter, what does that mean to you?
The idea that this is new is just so false. And the idea that I've been hearing a lot of arguments against Black Lives Matter that are the same arguments that were used against protesters during the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. They call them rabble-rousers, people who just want to create chaos, and you know, they're violent, they're communists. Those same things were said about people who were doing sit-ins and trying to end segregation. And when people can't see that line in history, the 60s weren't that long ago. Like, when segregation ended, that wasn't that our parents were alive. That wasn't that long ago. And for people to not be able to see that line through history and that systemic racism didn't just go away is really shocking to me. And so that's why I think this movement is so important, and it's come to a boiling point where it can't be ignored anymore. Racism can't just be normalized anymore. White privilege can't just be normalized anymore. People are tired of it. And I feel like it's important for me as a white person to use my voice to acknowledge my privilege and to be an ally, because, you know, this isn't just for Black people or BIPOC people to tackle on their own. That's not how it's going to work.
Thanks so much. Dio, I see you nodding. What have you got?
Very well said. Just to piggyback on what Michelle just said, Black Lives Matter is an inclusive term. I think people are taking it very literally, that we're only speaking about Black lives. And that's where the misconception of the problem stems from. When Black people are treated equally, when we're looked upon equally, and we start to have the same equal rights as everybody else, we don't just benefit, everybody benefits. A lot of the violence that people would like to say, or the protesting and all the things that are going on, will start to, I wouldn't say fizzle away, but will decrease in its magnitude. People are taking the phrase Black Lives Matter to the literal point of where now they say things like, and I know we're going to touch on it later, the all lives and blue lives, which I can't roll my eyes hard enough. I think people who are pushing back against Black Lives Matter, it's just lack of education, self-awareness, and self-education. And I think that they need to really take a good look within themselves and their souls and their spirits. If the shoe was on the other foot and this world was turned inside out and it was the exact reverse, would they not be fighting for the exact same thing that we as Black people are fighting for?
I remember when this all started very clearly. back like 8 years ago. And I just think that I've always seen the term Black Lives Matter as, you know, a portion of our society, Black people in this case, saying, hey, there's problems here, we're having issues, we need help. And I think it's always seemed to me like a good opportunity for everybody else to be like, okay, well, like, let's listen and see and play an active role in changing what needs to be changed.
It's a call to attention of the hardships faced due to racial inequality, and like it's more deep rooted than just blatant racism. It goes down to how the system is influenced by this racism. Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So like this pretty much affects everybody. It's boiled down to like people losing their human rights just over something they can't control that they're born with. And this is just a call to attention and also a call to action for anybody who can use their power to influence a change for the greater good.
My experience with the Black Lives Matter movement has been similar to Madison's. I remember when it started, I never really thought of it as an issue that really would affect me personally. But through everything I've learned, with everything I've been reading, and the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020, I've realized how important it is for everybody to look into themselves, even white people who view themselves as, you know, like the good ones, if that makes sense. It's really important for everybody to look into themselves and realize their white fragility and their complacency. And I think it's important for everyone to act as not just an ally, but an advocate, and use your voice and use your white privilege to your advantage, if possible. I've been reading Me and White Supremacy by, I think her name is Layla F. Saad. I think that's her name. She talks about the work that you're doing. There's a lot of journaling involved with going through the book, and she says, you know, if you're not putting in the work, if you're not doing everything, then you're not doing it right, and you can't view yourself as, you know, one of the good ones. You need to actually really do the work and look inside yourself and make a change, no matter how good you think you are, or no matter how fragile you are as a white person. I think it's really important for everybody to do the work during this time.
Yeah, so powerful. I guess before we move on to the next question, I wonder if maybe you could expand on the idea of white fragility, just in case folks are not familiar with what that means.
So white fragility, from my understanding, is essentially having a fear or feeling fragile speaking about racial issues and not really knowing how to go about it. I've had a lot of family members and friends say, you know, I don't want to speak up because I don't want to say the wrong thing and I don't know what to say. And that's a version of white fragility that I've been seeing a lot. And then also, I've realized another part of white fragility is not questioning yourself enough, and not acknowledging certain things that you see in your day-to-day life that you really should say something about.
The actual effect of it is just pretty much just keeping races in place and like still keeping this racial hierarchy. Like it could be unintentional, but that's the effect. It just doesn't allow people to speak on it because they feel like it's just a brick wall they're talking to. It's not going anywhere. They're gonna get defensive about it, and then there's gonna be more tension. There's no way to work through it. The real way to get through that is just people have to recognize when they're uncomfortable, ask why they're uncomfortable, and then work through that discomfort and have these conversations that we're having like right now, like especially in your own homes.
I find it really shocking when white people who haven't experienced racism, or maybe they don't know anyone who's experienced racism, deny that racism is a problem. Because it's like, why would people be taking to the streets? Like, why wouldn't you believe the people who have experienced it? Yeah. And so I find that denial, it's like, it seems like it's trying to protect the status quo, like you were saying, Katam, like trying to protect the safety they feel they have with the way things are now, and they don't want things to change.
I also think it has a lot to do with people don't like to live in the uncomfort of facing the reality that's staring right at them. And that exposes that fragileness, which puts them back on their heels, and they go straight into a defensive mode. of that's not real. Oh, I'm not being fragile. It's just, and until you can live in that discomfort, then you're not a part of the solution. You're a part of the problem. Just bare knuckles about it. Like a lot of the people who have reached out to me, who who are my white friends who I've grown up with, on another series that I was on, and I see them doing the work. And we can't do this alone. We need allies in this fight because it's been going on since before us. It's still here now, and we're hoping that it will not continue much longer.
And especially in Canada, like a lot of the conversation in the media when this started was, oh, well, that might be a big problem in the United States, but not in Canada. Even though the last residential school closed in 1996, like we, like the 60s scoop, like the way we've treated it, the Indigenous population in Canada is so shameful. In World War II, we put Japanese Canadians in internment camps. And our statistics with police violence against Black people is also deplorable. So it's like people like to kind of like gloss over the problem in Canada, but it's an issue here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in that vein of defensiveness, what we discussed was this kind of immediate response of all lives matter or blue lives matter. And I think, going back to the first question of like Black Lives Matter is, it's a reminder, it's a statement, it's an assertion of the validity of Black life, but people take it as only Black Lives Matter, or, instead of Black Lives Matter also. And yeah, so I think, I guess my question to you is like, why is saying all lives matter or even blue lives matter harmful, and how do those statements perpetuate racism?
I don't think y'all want me to go first on this.
I feel like Dad wants to go. I'm just waiting for him.
I don't know if y'all want me to go first on this one.
I read, I think a post on Instagram or something. It was explaining it really well. If someone's house is on fire, then we're going to go and help that house. If someone else says, "Oh, what about my house? What about all the other houses?" It's like, well, your house is on fire, so maybe we should dedicate some time to this house that is on fire. So I think that's a really great analogy when talking about Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter.
I find it surprising that a lot of my followers who have been posting All Lives Matter are people who would like claim to be Christian or claim to be, of a community that like embraces equality and like love your fellow man. A lot of people that seem to think that Black Lives Matter is like an attack on them, an affront on them, and so they respond with All Lives Matter. But it goes back to that denial that racism is a problem, that police violence against the BIPOC and the Black community is a problem. It's like if they can just deny that, then they can make it like not real in their reality. And then they come back with, well, all lives matter. To them, that's like a valid response. But they don't realize how belittling that is to Black people who are just trying to assert that their lives should matter equally with everyone else's lives.
All lives matter is bull. It's straight BS. Okay? All lives matter does not exist. Because if you were to take a color wheel that has every color on it, and you remove Black lives, or you remove brown lives, or you remove Asian lives, if you remove one of the colors of the entire color spectrum wheel, it is no longer all. It is missing something. Until you can confront the that we live in and the society that is truthfully right here in front of us, nobody can say all lives matter. Because if my life doesn't matter, then all lives don't matter. If your life doesn't matter, then all lives don't matter. And the blue lives matter is like, I can't even roll my eyes hard enough. It's not the police officers who are the problem. They are so inbred into this never be a rat, never tell on each other, that's the problem. It's not even the officers, it's the culture that is the problem.
Of course there are good cops and people want to stand up for them. And like, of course there are good police. Of course there are just police officers. No one's arguing that there isn't, but it's a systemic problem across the police forces in America and in Canada.
It's like a direct defense to the actual system that's causing a lot of the problems. Blue Lives Matter. It's not usually like the police fault. It's just the system lets a lot of things slide, and that leads to Derek Chauvin having like 14 or more misconduct violations, and then that lets him continue and then go on to take George Floyd's life. Same Blue Lives Matter. It's like, yeah, obviously these people matter. These dudes can also take off their uniform at the end of the day and not be blue. Also, at the same time, saying all lives matter, the perfect argument is like, okay, prove it, because we have proof that Black lives haven't mattered. Okay, you have no proof that all lives matter as an entirety because there's racial inequality. That's the problem. We need this extra focus in order for all lives to matter.
You know, obviously Black Lives Matter has been a huge proponent in bringing attention to the injustices within policing and police brutality. And so the response a lot of people give is like, okay, what about white people who've been killed by police officers? Or, you know, what about other non-Black people who've been the victims of police violence? And obviously, from my perspective, I think it's great that those things are being brought attention to. Nobody said we are only fighting for the end of police brutality against Black people. We are fighting for the end of police brutality against anyone and everyone. And obviously the Black folks, as we know statistically, are the most likely to experience police violence. Even here where I live in Vancouver, the Black population is less than 1%, but 5% of the people stopped and searched by police officers are Black. So it's an extremely disproportionate number that the evidence is there. So of course we start by focusing on Black folks, but then everybody benefits from it, right? Like if we're able to reduce the amount of violence and the amount of injustice, nobody gets left behind. So I'm curious if you folks have thoughts about that as well, when people kind of come back and they're like, oh, what about this white guy who was killed by police? Or like, you know, why do you only care about Black people? What about Black on Black crime? You know, those are some of the common responses we get when we're saying we're trying to address anti-Blackness within policing.
This is an issue, and we think about what the solutions are and whether it has to do with police unions or whatever we decide it to be, then that it solves police brutality for everybody, right? So whoever is saying these things thinks, you know, it shouldn't be about Black people. Like, just get on board and it'll fix it for everybody.
Also, just strengthening the system so that we can prevent it from happening to as many people as possible. And when it comes to like discussing Black on Black crime and white on white crime and all this crime, it's like there's so many more factors you have to understand in order to understand crime. But we are here with all the information we need on the table, and we're focused on an issue. It's like, how do you not see this as an opportunity to use this momentum? Once this problem is completely resolved, we use this momentum, and with the strength that we use to like fight police brutality, we can definitely fight crime. And I think a lot of the ideas of fighting crime doesn't actually come from like the amount of money we're putting into the police departments and stuff. It comes from like the very root of people who grow up to be criminals and stuff. Like there's a lot more you have to understand when it comes to that. So when you use that as an argument, please bring up like the amount of information you researched on like why these crimes are committed, where they stem from. But I never usually see that. It's just an empty argument.
Katam, I totally agree. And one thing I want to point out, and this does come back to police brutality, is like I've heard a lot of white people argue, well, you know, a lot of white people experience poverty. They experience, you know, they're murdered by the police. White people have problems too. And yes, of course, that's true. But it's not because of their race. So when you have Black people who are experiencing the same problems, and on top of that, they're experiencing systemic racism, it's not something that we can put up with anymore. And so I know we're going to talk about the idea of defunding the police. And so I just want to bring up that the police, they get the highest budget. Like in Toronto, it was the number one thing on the city's budget. They got over $1 billion. And so I don't want to abolish the police, but certainly this is the time when we can look at how the police is structured. How can we fix it? How can we make it better? How can we maybe reallocate some of those funds towards things like creating a different phone number you can call for mental wellness checks? How can we, I just think it's time to reassess the whole police system and how systemic racism is playing into that.
That's a perfect segue into our next question around these conversations about defund the police as, you know, as a call to action. And I think when people hear that, they feel instantly quite shocked, because I think, you know, as a society, especially in North America, we don't know really any other alternative. We've never lived in a world without police. So it's really, really hard for people to imagine what we mean when we say defund the police. And as you say, it's more about a redistribution of funds that's more equitable and makes more sense. Like, you know, I saw this tweet that was like, you know, police don't really stop crime. For the majority of the time, they show up after a crime has happened. And yes, for them, sometimes, you know, detectives are able to solve crimes, but really what we're looking for is, okay, let's look before that. How did this crime come to happen? You know, all of those things Tim was talking about around, like, you know, cycles of poverty, and how did people get to be in a place where a crime was being committed? And police aren't really involved in that. I guess for you folks, like, how have you come to understand this call to action when people are saying defund the police?
Instantly, as soon as I saw it, I was on the side where it's like, defund the police. Wait, we need the police. Like, I grew up like that, and then I kept seeing it show up, and obviously people are very passionate about this issue, and so I actually looked into it and went against my disbelief and my worked through my discomfort for even like acknowledging that police aren't like necessary in a lot of circumstances. And I found that, it's not about abolishing police. We're not trying to take all their money. We're trying to redistribute funds to actually prevent the actual causes, what we actually believe are more reasonable causes for like a lot of these crimes. And it'll be like mental health, or there's a lot of homeless people on the streets. And there's less funding for education. There's more funding to our discipline than it is to our recreation.
A CBC show called Cracked. I was a part of that show, so I know a lot about this aspect. And when I hear defund the police, what I actually hear is reallocate the funds into the way you have constructed this mechanism that is supposed to be here to serve the people. On the show of Cracked, it was about 2 police officers who were taken and put onto a special force. Each officer then had a team partner who was a medical professional. So when they would get 911 calls, because police officers are not trained to deal with people with mental illness, to have a medical professional right there beside you to be able to de-escalate the situation actually helps the situation not get escalated to a place to where then we find ourselves on these kind of forums talking about police brutality. Reallocating the funds, whether it's to mental health, whether it's to the arts, whether it's to whatever other place you want to allocate the money to. The money that I think what they're giving the police for all these extra weapons and better cars and all this other stuff should be reallocated to maybe the mental health professionals, like riding with them, where they have one person who is a medical professional who is always with the team. And if it starts to escalate past the point of where the medical professional can actually handle it, that's when the police officers step in to the situation. It was a show that was definitely before its time. I wish CBC would bring it back even just for reruns. I think it would really help people relook at what is meant by defund the police.
It's making me think, like, you know, I wonder, or it would be nice to hear from police officers and who are in the situations. And, you know, if I just try to think, if I were them and I'm going to situations that I'm not trained for, I would want something like that. I would want trained professionals to help me through this. I don't want to, like, who wants to be thrown into a situation that they're not trained for? So it would be cool to see police officers come out and say, hey, this is what we need. This is either the training that we need, or, you know, an associate to help me go to a situation like this, because I'm not trained for this. I don't know what I'm doing.
I just want to say briefly that in Calgary, there's a program with an organization called Homefront. They have one, it's for domestic violence. They have one domestic violence social worker per unit of the police in Calgary. So only one. But that basically, if they know that it's a domestic violence call, they'll try to have that social worker go. Or if it's like a repeat offender home, they'll try to have that social worker go, because they find, for example, a woman who is a victim of domestic violence is a lot more likely to speak and to open up to this social worker than to a police officer who's sitting there with his like armed guns and his ammo. Like she's going to open up to this social worker who has experience in this, who understands, who knows what to look for. And that program is great. It's a great pilot program, but only one person per unit is not enough. And it would be great to see that replicated in other cities too.
We're paying our tax dollars for a system that is evidently failing us. Like, Black people are 20 times more likely to be killed at the hands of police than white people. And through that information, we can see that, okay, this system has been going on for a while, and this is failing us in this way. Maybe we can allocate some of the funds, because it's definitely an industry that is more funded than a lot of services combined. And that's a problem. And that's been practiced for a while, and remnants of our history is in the system.
We often think of like things like the Musketeers, for example, as these like heroic people, but basically they were a type of police whose job it was to collect slaves who had escaped and return them to their slave owners. You know, things like the 60s scoop, basically taking children from their families and putting them onto reservations. And yeah, all of those things is basically what the RCMP was created for. And also, like, anything that comes from these like harmful origins, it's very difficult for it to ever be radically different from that, right? So I think that's why the systemic issues are so ingrained, like more than any other system. Like, obviously every system has its issues, but I think more than any other system, these systems that have started from a place of criminalizing people, particularly people of color and marginalized people, and yeah, either removing them from their home, putting them in jail, returning them to slave owners, like anything that starts that way, I think it's going to take centuries for us to reconfigure it, if ever. We need to see transformation so that we come to trust the police. And you know, when we talk about police violence, it's not just physical violence, it's also negligence in terms of, will they care about my issue? Will they follow up? You know, if I report, will I be safe? So there's kind of so many layers to it as well. Okay, so this has been an incredible conversation, and I really hope that people have taken something away from that. So I wanted to give the opportunity to all of you to just offer some last thoughts before we close up.
If you are an influencer, take pride in your power that you can reach out to more people. If you're not an influencer, take pride in the fact that you have family and friends that you can have these uncomfortable conversations, but also take pride in the fact that you can educate yourself. You have the world in front of you. You have the world in your hands. And white people take pride in the idea that your white privilege is a tool to dismantle white privilege, or systemic racism. You can give opportunity for people who don't have a loud enough voice. You can amplify voices. Everyone has their own power to influence change in their own way. It's just about how you do it. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just do it. Just take one step. Don't think, oh, what do I start? What article? Just do it. Search up Google. You can search up the most simplest thought that comes to mind, the first thing, and just start there. And then you follow down that path.
The idea of this chat that we had was to talk about Black Lives Matter and address issues that we felt we needed to shed some light on in an approachable way and in an educational way. People are always growing and learning, so I think it's important to remember that that's what growing up is, and changing your opinion is okay, and that's the kind of progress that's really going to help this movement.
Everybody's just a person. Everybody's just out here trying to figure out what the heck is going on. So I think it's important for people to give each other the benefit of the doubt as well, and just be open-minded.
Even if you live in a place where you feel like this is so far from your reality, if you live out in the country with your horses in a completely white community and you just don't even see this should still be important to you. And if you have compassion in your heart, then it's pretty simple to just start educating yourself. Just start, watch a TED Talk, Google an article like Katam said, do a little bit of research and really start to think about why millions of people are taking to the streets across America, Canada, and Europe. Why is this so important? It's an important step in the evolution of the human race, and we should all care about this.
All lives matter can't be true if Black Lives Matter bothers you. It's as simple as that.
So we just wanted to end off by sharing some resources for any folks who were inspired by this conversation and wanted to go further. We've put up some Instagrams you can follow, things you can read, and petitions you can sign if you were inspired by today's conversation. And we'll also share these resources across social media as well. There's so much work to be done. And, you know, as Michelle says, even if you feel disconnected from it, everybody has a role and a responsibility in this work and to be part of ongoing change. So thank you so much, guys, for joining me. This has been such a pleasure to be with you. And I think hopefully the conversation has really inspired some folks.